So you've just got yourself an Audi. You want to know how to improve it, how to get the maximum performance from it. And we're going to look at that in this video. This is just about Audis, thinking about tuning an Audi, where to get upgrades, where to source parts, and some of the best mods and the worst mods that you can do. Often the popular mods don't actually give you that much more power, so they're popular for other reasons. Hello, I'm Wayne from Talk Cars. So we're going to have a look at Audi tuning. Now, most of the cars that I've owned in recent years tend to be Audis. I've had quite a few A3s and I've had an A4. I've had petrol and diesel engines, so I've built up quite a knowledge on Audis, their engines and what makes them work. But just a few interesting facts about Audi. They're part of the Volkswagen Audi group, or the VAG group as some people like to call them. And this actually means that most of the cars have got a very modular design. They can use standard parts across the entire range of the car. In fact, if you look at an A4 and an A3, most of the parts are interchangeable. Now that's quite an important concept when you're modifying a car, because often there is a performance variant maybe in the next model line up, and just sourcing parts from that can actually give your car enhanced performance. The most common things that we're talking about here are obviously brakes. The performance variants tend to have bigger discs, meatier pads and larger calipers. The suspension also varies. Now you do need to get the suspension set up to match the engine weight and the weight of the car. If your suspension is too hard or too soft, you're going to degrade the performance. But in the main, across the VAG group, so Volkswagens, Seat, Skodas and Audis, most of the parts can be easily swapped around, and you can often just bolt on parts from bigger models to get a better performance enhancement on your car. So there's quite a few different engines in the Volkswagen group stable, and again, like the other parts, a lot of these engines can just be swapped and bolted. Now some engines are transverse and some are longitudinal, so the smaller cars like the A3 tend to have a transversely mounted engine, so it's mounted side on. If it's longitudinally mounted, you tend to get that in the longer bonneted cars, the A6s for example, and those engines are mounted long ways, and that really is the only difference between the models in the range. So as long as you get an engine that's got the correct orientation, you can usually just bolt it in, and it's often just a matter of doing the plumbing, and sometimes the sensors need to be swapped out as well. But you can get some really good power upgrades just by dropping a different engine into your Audi. So we've seen people with smaller Audis, the A1s for example, and they fitted the 2-litre TFSI engines into that, and they've actually created a really good car. The A1s are so small and light. If you put the 2-litre TFSI engine in, you've made a lot of power, and you're not messing around with internal engine mods. It's almost a straight swap. You need to think also about the transmission and the way it all connects and getting the ECU running, but they're not major issues. Often when you're upgrading an engine and you're after big power gains, you need to take the engine apart and you've got a major engineering project on your hands. So engine swaps really are a really nice way of upping the power of your Audi very, very easily, and it just helps to know the different types of engines. Now every model revision that comes out tends to improve on the previous ones, and often when a new engine range or engine model is introduced, there will be inherent weak spots and problem areas with those early versions, and as the line progresses they're engineered out. So knowing where those weak spots are can actually save you a lot of heartache and problems in the long run. And also different components are used within the engines. Often the performance variants of the car, you typically get a 150 brake horsepower version and a 170 brake horsepower version, or there and thereabouts, and they're predominantly exactly the same, but they may boast a different turbocharger and have different mapping. So often just swapping in the turbo from the more powerful model and getting the mapping sorted will effectively take your engine up to those levels. And we've seen people with the 140 diesels taking it right up to 170 with just a remap, and because it's the smaller turbo, it actually spools up more quickly and is more responsive than the standard 170, but you are approaching the upper limits of those turbos they fit to the 140s. The KO3 and the KO4 and the KO3S were the common turbos that were fitted to these cars, and if you push them too hard they do tend to start to whine like a siren, and they will eventually brake on you. So this is why people fit bigger turbos or stronger turbos or hybrid turbos, where they've taken the casing of a standard Audi turbo and they've replaced the internals with higher grade components that have made it a lot stronger and a lot better. Getting the handling right on your car is always a significant aim when you're tuning it, and it's no different with Audis. From the factory, you've got a choice of suspension systems, typically a soft average suspension, which is harder than most manufacturers because it's an Audi. You get the S-line suspension, which is much firmer and about 20 to 30 millimeters lower than the stock suspension. I've had both. The S-line suspension is really good for handling, but it is quite hard and crashy around town. And in most cases, this is totally subjective, and there's going to be a lot of people that disagree with me. But a set of coilovers that you can adjust the ride height and even the stiffness and the bump characteristics of the suspension can make a big difference to the handling. I have had a lot of the standard S-line suspension springs break on me. My diesel was a case in point. 3 of those springs just shattered and broke, and that seemed to be a common issue, so they must have had a bad batch of springs that went into these. So if you do get a broken spring, it would be my recommendation that you replace all of the springs, because that could be a sign that you're in this bad batch and the other springs are on their way out. It's certainly inconvenient when you've broken a spring and you're failing your MOT. The car's handling has deteriorated. So we get asked a lot about induction kits, sports exhausts. Now, you won't really notice a power gain if you add either of those 2 items on their own. If you've done lots of other mods and you're getting a restriction in the power, then it does make sense to address those items. So wherever you're getting a restriction, whether it's the air coming into the engine or the air going out of the engine, if you address that and remove that restriction, you can actually fully realise the power that the car is potentially making for you. When it comes to exhaust, the biggest component sapping your power is generally the pollution control. So in a diesel, that would be your DPF filter and the catalysts, and certainly in petrol cars, the catalysts. They do suck power. In the real world though, you're probably only losing about 6 or 7 brake horsepower. So in some cases it's a little more than that. So just removing those devices can free up a little bit of extra power, but you're not talking about much extra power. So I really don't think it's worth going to the expense of upgrading the exhaust system and the intake system for such a small potential power gain that you won't necessarily meet in everyday driving. And in most regions and areas, it's illegal to make modifications to those pollution controls or to remove them completely. So there are sports alternatives that flow much better. And in most cases, we've seen that those sports catalysts actually flow as well as a catless exhaust or a decatted exhaust. They've got lots of names depending on where you are in the world. But the general concept is remove the restriction and you get more power. It does help the turbo to spool up more quickly. The best mod you can ever do to an Audi is, in our opinion, one that doesn't cost much money but makes a significant difference to your power and your driver experience. And that has to be a remap. Just changing the map parameters inside the engine can raise your power band significantly and make the car much more engaging to drive. My diesel was a 2-litre TDI, it was the 140. I had that mapped, I had a choice of maps that I could drop in at a moment's notice. And the more aggressive map did significantly improve the power, but I had traction issues low down and it was a little bit too smoky for me. So you need to really look at where you want the power and what amount of sacrifice you're willing to make in order to get that power. The wheels are often talked about in Audi circles as to what size wheels, and with most of the stuff we're talking about, it's very subjective. Different people have got different opinions, and we would really invite you to hit our comments section. Let us know what mods you've done, what you think about the mods you've done, and what mods you're planning to do, and that'll help us all to make an informed decision when it comes to upgrading our cars. Now, with most Audis, you've got a choice of 17-inch, 18-inch, 19-inch, and some come with 20-inch alloy wheels. In everyday driving in our country, it's quite wet. I really do recommend going for the smaller sizes, the 17s and the 18s. Most of the Audis I've had have had the 18s. They seem to attract a lot of dinks from the curbs. Tyres are quite expensive. But the 17s, I really liked the handling. The car felt much lighter, much more responsive to drive. And I really would recommend considering dropping down an alloy wheel size, especially if your car is experiencing tramlining where it's resistant to change direction. You've got to think about the weight of these alloy wheels, and bigger wheels may look nicer, but they're much heavier. So in terms of the internal components in the engine, some of the engines actually come with very strong forged components and they can handle massive power gains. The old 1.8T engine from Volkswagen was a fantastic unit. It tended to come with about 150 brake horsepower. Some of the performance variants took that up to 200, 225, but most tuners can actually get about 350 brake horsepower from that standard block because it is so strong. If you check out the articles on our site, you'll actually see which blocks have the strong components and can handle those big power figures. But being able to double the power of an engine without having to change the internal components, it's a significant win in my book, and certainly something I would recommend thinking about doing. With Audis, servicing is important. You must use the correct grade of oil as well. We've heard of sludge build-up where incorrect oil has been used, particularly with the turbo engines, and that can cause catastrophic turbo failure. And some of the models come with long life service schedules. We wouldn't really recommend keeping your oil in the car for 24,000 miles or 2 years, although on paper it seems to be able to do that. In real life, where you're doing lots of short journeys and you're putting the car through all sorts of different conditions, it makes sense in my book to change the oil annually. And when you strip down an engine that's had regular oil changes, you'll see very little engine wear, which is a testament to how the engine oil protects the engine over the lifespan of the car. Problems and pitfalls to look out for on Audis is often down to carbon build-up. The direct injection engines, diesels and petrols, and the exhaust gas recirculation system tend to deposit a lot of carbon on the intake on the valves, and that will necessitate a clean. It's a bigger problem with the large capacity engines. Audi have designed around it in the more recent engines, and they've actually got fuel injectors in the intake that sprays a little bit of fuel in the warm-up cycle onto those valves to keep them carbon free and clean. But a walnut clean or some other process that will clean the intake will actually restore a lot of the power that you've lost over the years. So it depends so much on how you use the car and whether you do lots of short journeys or you really do give it a good thrashing and burnout. We hope this video has been useful to you about Audi tuning. There's so much we could go into. Audis are a real passion of mine, so please visit our site, look up the many articles. Basically everything I've learned about Audis I've put into articles on the website, so they're there for all to see. And I really do welcome your feedback and comments. By sharing the knowledge that we have as a community, we can actually grow the knowledge and people can enjoy better performance from their car by avoiding the common mistakes that a lot of people make when they're tuning and upgrading their Audi. So if you haven't subscribed already, please do so. We've got lots more articles planned. We're going to go into specific models. We know a lot of people are interested in particular specific tips on what mods they can do to their car.